more than likely were a victim of the scam we're going to be discussing today. This scam ran for over a decade and was one of the greatest and most fascinating fraud cases of all time, because from 1989 until 2001 there were basically no legitimate winners of the high value prizes from any of the McDonald's games. From McDonald's Monopoly to Scrabble to Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, none of the winners for over 12 years were real, and not an iota of suspicion was raised by one of the most famous and profitable companies in the entire world. Instead of winners randomly winning prizes by tearing off the game pieces on McDonald's menu items, the high value prizes were being stolen and sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars. McDonald's didn't have a clue, and the only reason this scam was discovered was because an informant called in a tip to the FBI. This story is packed with crazy twists and turns, and after becoming fascinated with the story a few years ago myself, I wanted to leave no stone unturned, and I went home to Tampa, Florida to interview a person who was the reason this entire $30 million scam came crashing down around McDonald's. So sit back, relax, grab a coffee or a drink, and let's dive in to one of the most fascinating scams of all time, the McDonald's Monopoly scam.
Trying to get my Facebook.
Simon Marketing was a company in Atlanta, Georgia that in 1980 was tasked by their biggest client to create a promotion aimed at getting more families to visit their client's establishment. Simon Marketing hit it out of the park when they developed the iconic Happy Meal in 1980. Today, over 40 years later, Happy Meals can still be purchased around the globe at one of the most successful and widely recognized businesses in the world, McDonald's. After Simon developed the Happy Meal, McDonald's was so pleased by the result that in 1987 they tasked Simon Marketing with creating a new promotion, but this time they wanted it to be for adults. So after much thought and deliberation, Simon created and launched a new exciting game at McDonald's, Monopoly. The Monopoly game was extremely successful for McDonald's, and they also ran a number of other similar games over the years, including Scrabble and Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. While each game had its own unique characteristics, the basic premise was the same. During a certain period of time, the majority of McDonald's menu items would be sold with tearaway tabs that could either reveal an instant prize-winning ticket or could be part of a pair, trio, or quarter that, when collected with the other missing pieces, could be redeemed for a prize. When most people think about the competition, they think about peeling the tickets off the McDonald's food and beverage containers, but a lot of people don't know that you can actually just go into any McDonald's and ask for a game piece while the game is taking place. You can do this once a day for the entire promotion. This is why all promotions have that little line, "Purchase not necessary," on them, because companies cannot require participants to make purchases to enter or to win sweepstakes.
I never knew that you could play that game for free.
It would be considered gambling. So people have to be allowed to play for free in order to get around gambling regulations. Every time the competition ran, there was slightly different prizes, but generally there were $2 million pieces, one instant prize winner and one winner who needed to collect both pieces, Park Place and Boardwalk. Aside from the two $1 million winning pieces, there were... If you were around...
We're talking about the McDonald's scam, the Monopoly game. Who knew that it was scamming? They were scamming people. Man, I didn't know. That's not why none of my people ever won. Like, I know nobody who ever won the McDonald's Monopoly game. I don't know nobody who won it. We're gonna get into this video.
Around in the 1990s and the beginning of the 2000s, you more than likely were a victim of the scam we're going to be discussing today. This scam
if you knew
ran
about
for
the
over
scam,
a decade
put it
and
in
was
the
one
comment.
of the greatest and most
I did not
fascinating
know.
fraud cases of all time. Because from 1989 until 2001, there were basically no legitimate winners of the high-value prizes from any of the McDonald's games. From McDonald's Monopoly to Scrabble to Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, none of the winners for over 12 years were real. And not an iota of suspicion was raised by one of the most famous and profitable companies in the entire world.
Simon.
Instead of winners randomly winning prizes by tearing off the game pieces on McDonald's menu items,
Let me know if
the
y'all know about
high-value
this.
prizes were being
Monopoly scam
stolen
lady running
and
off.
sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars. McDonald's didn't have a clue, and the only reason this scam was discovered
McDonald's didn't
was
know about
because
the
an
scam, so we're not gonna
informant
blame
pulled in a
McDonald's.
tip to the FBI.
We're
This
gonna blame the
story
people
is
that was running the
packed
game.
with crazy twists and turns, and after becoming fascinated with the story a few years ago myself, I wanted to leave no stone unturned, and I went home to Tampa, Florida to interview a person who was the reason this entire $30 million scam came crashing down around McDonald's. So sit back, relax, grab a coffee or a drink, and let's
Cute
dive
little
into
child
one
star?
of the most fascinating scams
You've got
of
the
all
wrong
time,
girl.
the McDonald's Monopoly scam.
Sorry. Can I take this stuff?
Elegance is a
Simon
virtue.
Marketing was a company in Atlanta, Georgia that in 1980 was tasked by their biggest client to create a promotion aimed at getting more families to visit their client's establishment.
If you knew
Simon
about the
Marketing
scam, let me
hit
know.
it out of the
Welcome to
park
Farm
when they
Lane
developed
84.
the iconic Happy Meal in 1980. Today, over 40 years later,
Whether
Happy
landing
Meals
or
can still
performing,
be
keep
purchased
Jet
around the
Master.
globe at one
Got
of
it.
the most
Follow
successful
me to the
and
best drop
widely
zone.
recognized businesses in the world, McDonald's. After Simon developed the Happy Meal, McDonald's was so pleased by the result that in 1987
Our
they
next
tasked
tour
Simon
comes
Marketing
here,
with creating
right?
a new promotion.
You want me
but
to be
this
the
time
Jet Master?
They wanted it to be for
Respect for the
adults.
elderly
so
is
after
admirable.
much thought and deliberation, Simon created and launched a new exciting game at McDonald's, Monopoly. The Monopoly game was extremely successful for McDonald's, and they also ran a number of other similar games over the years, including Scrabble and Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. While each game had its own unique characteristics, the basic premise was the same. During a certain period of time, the majority of McDonald's menu items would be sold with tearaway tabs that could either reveal an instant prize-winning ticket or could be part of a pair, trio, or quarter that, when collected with the other missing pieces, could be redeemed for a prize. When most people think about the competition, they think about peeling the tickets off the McDonald's food and beverage containers, but a lot of people don't know that you can actually just go into any McDonald's and
Reloading.
ask for a game
Don't worry,
piece
it'll
while the
just
game
take a
is
moment.
taking place. You can do this once a day for the entire promotion. This is why all promotions have that little line, "purchase not necessary," on them, because companies cannot require participants to make purchases to enter or to win sweepstakes, because if they did, it would be considered gambling. So people have to be allowed to play for free in order to get around gambling regulations. Every time the competition ran, there was slightly different prizes, but generally there were $2 million pieces, one instant prize winner and one winner who needed to collect both pieces, Park Place and Boardwalk. Aside from the two $1 million winning pieces, there were other various denominations of winning tickets. $500,000, $200,000, $100,000, $50K, $25K, and so on. There were also homes, cars, vacations, game consoles, computers, gift cards, home theaters, payments towards your mortgage, travel money, gift cards, and other common prizes such as free McDonald's menu items. The menu items were very common to win, with about 1 in 4 tickets tickets being for a free menu item, such as free fries, free cheeseburgers, free McMuffins, free sodas, and so on. People loved this game, and it was so successful that McDonald's saw their sales climb around 40% when they ran Monopoly or one of the other tear ticket games. With the games being so successful, McDonald's left it in the hands of Simon Marketing to run. McDonald's themselves didn't really know too much about the game, how Simon went about conducting it, how they went about protecting those tickets that were worth millions of dollars, because McDonald's was pretty happy with Simon as they continued to see people winning, they continued to see huge increases in their profits, and they also got a lot of free publicity out of the people who won. They made big deals out of the winners, they made commercials, put them in the paper, news channels would pick these stories up, and they'd also be able to put their winners up in the restaurants. To McDonald's, who were making $100 to $200 million off each turn of these games, giving away a small portion of that in the form of prizes really wasn't a big deal at all. They really weren't bothered who won as long as someone won, or as long as they could promote it. To try and promote the game, McDonald's would take the winners of all the cash amounts of cars and vacations, and they would put them in dozens of commercials to show that normal, everyday people, just like you at home, were the people winning these amazing, life-changing prizes. But the thing was, that wasn't true at all. Normal, everyday people weren't winning these prizes, because all of the McDonald's tearaway ticket games were completely and utterly rigged. When the rigging was discovered in 2000, it soon became clear that for over a decade, nearly the entire run of these games, the games had been infected, and normal everyday people didn't have a chance to win at all. In the year 2000, in the Jacksonville, Florida FBI office, a new FBI special agent, Doug Matthews, was speaking to his partner and senior agent, Rick Dent. Matthews noticed a post-it note on Dent's desk that read McDonald's Monopoly fraud with a question mark. Doug asked what this was about, and Rick gave it to him and said, "You can go and take a look at it because I haven't got around to it, but it could be a hoax or it could just be someone trying to get someone else in trouble." Rick told Doug that there was a phone number on the back of the post-it note, and this number was for an informant who had called in a tip to the FBI. Doug called the informant, and the tipster told Special Agent Matthews that all of the McDonald's games were rigged, and all the winners were getting their tickets from someone named Uncle Jerry. The informant gave 3 other names and said they knew them to all be related. The first name was Robin Colombo, and the informant said Robin's husband had won a car. The second name was Robin's father, Buddy Fisher, who had won $1 million ticket. And the third name was Gloria Brown, who the informant said was a good friend of Robin's and who had also won $1 million ticket. A key thing to remember is that this was taking place in the year 2000, a very different time when it came to the internet. You couldn't just hop on the internet and do a little detective work. Social media didn't even exist. Agent Matthews looked into some government records and was able to in fact confirm that Robin Colombo was married to a man called Jerry Colombo who had won a Dodge Viper. Her father had won $1 million ticket, and so had her friend Gloria Brown. Matthews then went to Senior Agent Dent and told him what he'd been able to confirm. Dent immediately realized that something here was not right and went to the squad supervisor, Chris Graham. Rick, who was a mathematician, explained the odds of people in the same family winning, and there's not enough people on Earth to justify those odds. They then spoke to Assistant District Attorney Mark Devereaux to see if this would be something he'd be interested in prosecuting. Mark said yes, and the investigation began. At this time, Doug, Rick, Chris, and Mark only had these 3 names that the informant had given them. They had no idea what they were about to uncover, how many people were involved, how long this had gone on, and how wild the story really was. The first thing they decided to do was to contact McDonald's. They were taking a huge risk here because they didn't know how the contest had been infected. Maybe it was someone at McDonald's head office that was involved. The FBI began investigating everything they could about the game, and they invited McDonald's down to Jacksonville. McDonald's sent 3 people, including the director of global security, Rob Holm. The FBI told them not to tell anyone that they were coming down to Jacksonville to meet the FBI. When McDonald's got down to the FBI office, the FBI agents were watching them very closely. They were looking for any signs of worry. They were trying to see if any of the McDonald's employees were involved. As someone who was involved in this would obviously be a little bit worried being called in by the FBI. The FBI sat down and told McDonald's everything they had found out so far, and the employees could not believe what they were hearing. They were beyond shocked. After a long meeting, the McDonald's employees went back to the corporate office in Illinois to discuss what they were going to do, as McDonald's was on the cusp of beginning a new game of Monopoly. The FBI had told them that it would be a good idea to go ahead with this game, as they could investigate it and hopefully find out not only who was stealing the game pieces, but how in fact they were doing it. McDonald's thought about this long and hard, and obviously running the rigged games meant none of McDonald's customers could win. McDonald's finally made their decision, and they invited the FBI up to their Illinois corporate office and told the FBI, let's do it. Let's run the game one more time. The FBI then went full steam ahead to investigate the infected contest. But first, they needed a name for their investigation. At that time, the current McDonald's competition that was going on was Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? And Who Wants to Be a Millionaire's game was also being rigged by the same individuals. So the FBI took inspiration from this popular game, and just like that, Operation Final Answer began. The first thing the FBI asked was for McDonald's to tell them everything they knew about any of the Monopoly or sweepstakes games. But being that McDonald's outsourced the marketing and the entire process of all of their promotions to Simon Marketing, McDonald's had to approach Simon under the guise that they wanted to learn about the security process for all of the games. They didn't want to tip off anyone outside of the very, very small group within McDonald's who knew that the games had been infected. So Rob Holm, McDonald's director of global security, went to Simon and found out how they were securing the tickets and running the promotions. Simon was using a printing company called Dittler Brothers to print the over 500 million game pieces they used each time they ran one of the promotions. If you were to lay all the tickets out for one of the games, they would stretch from New York all the way to Sydney, Australia. All of the regular pieces that were either not winners or would win McDonald's menu items were printed by Dittler, and all of the high-value game pieces had an extremely secure procedure that they went through. Dittler Brothers would have what they called a winner run day, and at 5 a.m., all the necessary people and witnesses would assemble to witness the winner run. Observers from Simon Marketing, the heads of security for both Dittler and Simon, who happened to be a divorced couple, Marsha Derbyshire and Jerome Jacobson, and there was also an independent auditor along with a few other Simon and Dittler employees. The head of security for Simon would access the high-value tickets vault that were kept in a vault that required 2 different people with 2 different security codes to open, kind of like a missile silo from the Cold War. The tickets were then cut out, counted, and placed inside an envelope. The envelope had a number on the front dictating how many high-value game tickets were inside. So say there were $2 million tickets, 2 $500,000 tickets, 5 $200K, 5 $100K, and 10 other tickets ranging from 10 to 75,000. They would write 24 on the front of the envelope, and every person who was there as a witness would sign the back of the sealed envelope where the seal was. And then each of the envelope's corners and along the seal were sealed with tamper-proof stickers. If you removed these stickers, it left a huge black mark void sign, so you would know it had been tampered with if anyone tried to remove the stickers. The envelope was then placed in a briefcase that had two combinations. One side, the head of security for Simon, had the combination, and the other side belonged to the independent auditor. The briefcase was handcuffed to Jerome Jacobson, the head of security, who wore a bulletproof vest, and he and the independent auditor set off for whatever McDonald's packaging factory the winners were going to be inserted into. Once at the factories, the tickets would be randomly inserted into a run and then sent out to their destinations. No one knew and no one was supposed to know exactly where the high game pieces were. When it came to security at both Simon and Dittler, the heads of both the securities took their jobs extremely seriously. Jerome Jacobson was actually poached by Simon as he had previously worked for Dittler Brothers, and they poached him because he took his job so seriously. When Jerome was poached by Simon, he was given a $70,000 a year salary. Again, remember this is taking place in the late 80s and the 90s, so that's an amazing salary. He was flown around on first class to all the factories that he had to go to, and he had some other amazing benefits. Jerome and his ex-wife, Marcia, used to get into a lot of fights because Jerome would sometimes take things so seriously. He would follow employees to the bathroom, he'd check their bags, their pockets, in their shoes, the bottom of their shoes, all to make sure they weren't stealing. He also sometimes would look over the shoulders of the guards and get their combination and then start screaming and shouting because the guards let him do that. After McDonald's saw how secure the process was, they were very impressed, but even more confused as to how someone could be stealing these tickets. Maybe you're thinking, were they stealing the tickets or were they forging them? But Simon had that covered too. When winners sent the winning ticket in, the envelopes were opened by someone wearing gloves, and the entire process was filmed. The tickets all had tiny errors in them, like chips out of certain words, that were changed every single competition, and there was also a special hidden code written on the tickets but could only be read under blacklight. So McDonald's started running the competition again, and it didn't take long for the first $1 million winner to contact McDonald's and let them know that he had won. The FBI then realized that a perfect way to strengthen their case was to speak to these winners under the guise of a recorded promotional interview. That's when the FBI had McDonald's bring in the person who had the most contact with all the winners, a woman named Amy Murray who worked in the games department of McDonald's. When Amy was told about the Monopoly game being compromised, the FBI enlisted her help to get the winners to lie on the record. So the latest winners contacted Simon, and then Amy contacted them and told them that they'd personally be coming with a camera crew to give them their check and hear the story of how they won. That's when the FBI geared up for an undercover investigation. They got some of their agents to pretend to be part of a production company, and they, along with Amy, went to speak to the latest winner, Michael Hoover. Shamrock Productions was going to be the name of the FBI's production company, and they interviewed Michael Hoover and captured on film his fabricated story about winning the ticket. The FBI also tapped the phones of Michael Hoover, and the second the FBI left, Michael Hoover placed a phone call to a man named AJ Glum. Michael told AJ, "I can't believe it. They believed the whole thing." Hoover told Glum that he thought Amy liked him, and they also discussed the fact that Hoover told McDonald's, or unbeknownst to him, the FBI, that he was going to buy a boat with his winnings and call it Ruthless Scoundrel. But now the FBI not only had Hoover lying about how he won the ticket on camera, but they also had the recorded phone call about how he was going to spend the money, so they'd be able to seize seize all those assets. There is a wild coincidence about the wiretap involved with a key person in this case, but we'll get to that in a minute. So now they knew Michael Hoover had lied. They also knew someone named AJ Glum was involved somehow in this operation. By this stage, they'd also pulled a list of all the previous winners. Again, this was the 90s. It was harder to find connections between people. You couldn't just jump on the internet or go on Facebook and see who's friends with each other. So the FBI did the old-fashioned type of searching. In case you aren't a millennial like me or older, back prior to cell phones, the internet, and tech today, you used to get a long list of all the numbers you dialed every month on your house phone or your landline. So the FBI got these lists of the winners' phone calls for the month they won, 2 months before they won, and 2 months after they won. They went through them page by page, line by line. Finally, after searching and searching, the agents found a common number that every single winner was calling at one stage or another. There seemed to be heavy activity before they won, activity when they won, activity after, and then they never seemed to call the number again. They looked up whose number this was, and to the surprise of everyone, the number belonged to the shoe-checking and bulletproof vest-wearing Simon Marketing's absolute head of security, Jerome Jacobson. So the FBI knew that Jerome Jacobson was Uncle Jerry, and he was the person who was acquiring and distributing all of these tickets. The informant had given them some other names, Buddy Fisher and Gloria Brown, and when the FBI looked further into the names and also just some of the wiretaps and other things that they were able to gather, they found out there was actually another Jerry that was involved with this scheme. So this Jerry was Jerry Colombo, and he actually was a recruiter for Uncle Jerry. There was a number of other recruiters, and we'll talk about them in a minute, but Uncle Jerry was acquiring the tickets, and we'll talk about how exactly he was acquiring these at the end, when I will also be speaking with the person who is the reason that this entire scheme came crumbling down. I went all the way home to Tampa to speak with this person, and we'll be talking about that at the end. But as I was saying, Uncle Jerry acquired the tickets. He would then give them to the recruiters. In the beginning, his only recruiter was Jerry Colombo, and Jerry would basically distribute the tickets for Uncle Jerry and then deliver a fee back to Uncle Jerry. So in the beginning, Jerry Colombo was using a lot of his friends, family, and extended family. For example, his wife, Robin Colombo, was quite involved with helping him pick who the winners were. Her father, Buddy Fisher, that's Robin Colombo's dad, was one who won the $1 million ticket. Also, Robin's brother-in-law won one of the $1 million tickets, and there also was her friend Gloria Brown, who won one of the $1 million tickets. According to Robin Colombo and some other members of the family that I've spoken to, there was a lot of other schemes going on with Uncle Jerry and Jerry Colombo, one of which was the gray M&M.
The rules say if you find a gray plaster M&Ms, the winning bag could be worth $1 million.
And Robin Colombo has spoken about the fact that that is one of the things that they were involved too, along with Publishers Clearinghouse. Obviously, these are all just allegations. That's what members of the family have said. And when I've looked into some of these things, it does definitely seem plausible because, for example, if you look at the M&M thing, when you go back and look, the Mars Company did actually give their marketing in the 90s
to Simon Marketing, so they had the same potential people that were dealing with the M&M competition and sweepstakes that were dealing with McDonald's. And as I said, a lot of people talk about this being the McDonald's Monopoly scam, but it wasn't just Monopoly. They had every other game that they were gaming as well. So the way it would work is Uncle Jerry would acquire the tickets. He would then charge a certain amount per ticket. So for the $1 million ticket, he would ask for between 50 and 100,000, and then if it was 100,000, he would ask for 10, 20,000. It usually broke down like that. Now, each of the recruiters had a different fee, and I'll talk about each of the fees when I talk about each of the recruiters. So Jerry Colombo, he charged the winners half of what they won. So when you win $1 million game piece, you don't actually just get given $1 million. It's broke.
Make the all-electric Cadillac Lyric all yours. A stylish SUV that takes luxury beyond thrilling all the way to electric. Experience yours today at Cadillac.com/lyric.
Broken down in payments over 20 years. So you get $50,000 in the form of a check every year. Usually about 15,000 of that goes to taxes, dependent on, what bracket you're in. And then there's 35,000 left. Jerry Colombo was taking about half of that, so it didn't leave the winners with a ton. And also Jerry Colombo was the only recruiter who asked for some sort of money up front. So for example, Gloria Brown has spoken about the fact that she had to remortgage her home because she was a single mother, pretty much living paycheck to paycheck, which is, how most people live, especially nowadays. And so she remortgaged her home, and she actually gave, tens of thousands of dollars in cash on the side of the road to Jerry Colombo. And then whenever she would get her 50,000, 15,000 went in taxes, and he would usually come and take between 10 and 25,000, most of the time 25,000, and that left her with about $10,000 a year, which, because she'd remortgaged her home, she has spoken about how she was paying about $300 to $400 on her home, which, in a weird kind of story, she must be very lucky or very unlucky, how you look at this. She actually won her home in a competition before. So when she actually remortgaged her home, her mortgage went from like $300 to $400 all the way up to $1,000. So at the end of the day, when you add all that up and put all those factors in, she really was pretty much breaking even, maybe having, a couple of thousand extra here and there. And then you have this kind of, society and like your friends and family thinking, oh, she's won $1 million, but it's really not what it seems. However, there was a major change of circumstance after just a few short years when it came to anyone who had won a ticket through Jerry Colombo, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. So as I was speaking about in the previous chapter about Michael Hoover and the FBI going with a camera crew to film everything about him winning and capturing on camera his story that they're locking him into, obviously. And then if this goes to trial, they're able to just turn on the screen and say, look, this is this person lying and saying they won this ticket this way. So it's very good evidence. And the FBI was like, how do we get this sort of evidence for other winners, the previous winners? So what they decided to do was they were going to organize a winners reunion. And obviously they didn't want to pay all this money to have this massive, they were talking about having a big reunion in Vegas. So what they did was they basically told the winners, oh, come to this hotel, we'll set up, we'll get your sort of story on camera. And then if you do that down the road, it's going to lead to this big reunion, all expenses trip paid to Vegas. So that was a big sort of push for the winners to want to go and do this because it was going to result in this amazing trip. And they didn't really question it because Gloria and some other winners have have spoken about the fact when they did win, they got sort of a trip like this out of it where they got to stay in a hotel for a few nights and, be put up, and McDonald's paid for everything. So they held these winners' interviews at the Marriott, and they had each of the winners come in. They'd made a big board that had stars with all of the winners on it and all of the locations they apparently won in, which a lot of those locations weren't true. The only time the winners had ever really been there is to go into the McDonald's and claim the ticket, claim that they won. So each of the winners did these on-camera interviews, and a lot of this information has been made available through like Freedom of Information requests, through other documentaries and things like that. And I actually talked about this case way back in very early 2020 when the McMillions show came out on HBO. I talked about this back on my original channel, and it's a very terrible video, but a lot of the stuff that I requested like way back then, I was able to get access to for this one. And also luckily I've been able to have relationships with some people that were involved or were family members of people involved, so they've been able to tell me some bits of information that weren't really made available before. The FBI got a number of these past winners to do interviews, and of course two of the most important interviews were the two named people by the informant, which were the interviews for Buddy Fisher and Gloria Brown. Buddy Fisher's interview, you can tell that he is extremely nervous and he is just pouring sweat. He was actually someone that was in the military, and a lot of his family members have spoken about the fact that he had never broken a rule or a law in his life. So whenever he was being questioned on camera about how he won this ticket, which he knew he had won in a fraudulent way, it seems as though it really, really was getting to him, because even the FBI went as far as asking the winners in some of these interviews, oh, so no one, gave you this ticket and asked you to turn it in? Like they really were saying things like that to them. So every time that he would say no, he would just pour more sweat. And one of the FBI agents has pointed this out before, but I thought it was pretty interesting, is when you look at a lot of these winners talking about how they won the ticket and they're telling the story, when you're telling a story of something that happened to you that you're based on your memory, you're not actually remembering when it happened. So they're not remembering, oh, when I went and turned this ticket in. You're remembering the last time you remembered something. So when you're accessing a memory like that, something like winning $1 million, that's not something that's happening to you every day. Something like that should be seared in your memory, that you can easily recall what you were wearing, what you were doing, how it felt, things like that. Whereas if you're remembering getting up in the morning, you do that every single day. It's hard to say, oh, 2 Tuesdays ago, I wore a pink hoodie, because things like that, they're not exceptions. So they're just kind of put in the back and not really remembered, whereas something like this should be crystal clear. And you can see a lot of the people who supposedly won these tickets telling you a story, but they're sort of fumbling through their words, trying to make up how they won this ticket.
I found the insert, and I found the little tear-off tab.
Gloria Brown and the FBI agents have both spoken about the fact that in her interview, she was very guarded, and you can see she's just giving like quite short answers. And the FBI did say, she didn't really want to give us anything. And Gloria Brown has said that she knew something was up. She knew that this wouldn't just be, an interview and that's the end of it. She knew something was going to come of this, which I think is really interesting. So she must be pretty switched on to be able to pick all this stuff up.
I knew
I wouldn't
they
have
was
did no
asking me
interview,
questions.
man.
The questions they was asking me.
Y'all can have that money.
did it on risk of how
Yeah,
I
I gotta
spent the
do
money.
it like that.
And I was kind of numb walking out the door like, oh, this is it. Something is going to happen from this.
Because
Especially
they
if I
didn't
know
go
that
in on her the
I
same
was
way they
cheating.
did with Buddy Fisher and say, you know, nobody told you to claim this ticket. So pretty interesting that she was aware that this was not what it seemed. So as I mentioned, Jerry Colombo was the only and sole recruiter for the early and mid-90s. And actually in 1998, Jerry Colombo and his wife Robin and their young son Francesco were driving on the highway. Robin was driving and their son, who was a few days away from being 3, was crying in the back of his car seat. Jerry was getting aggravated by the sound, so he took the little boy and took him out of his car seat and lay him down on the back seat so that he could go to sleep. And 2 seconds later, their car was hit by a massive truck and completely totaled. Robin Colombo had to be cut out with the jaws of life, and their young son was completely unharmed apart from a broken arm. And when they looked in the back seat, his car seat, like his child seat, was completely crushed. And the only reason he survived was because his father took him out and lay him down on the back seat. Jerry Colombo actually was able to climb out of the car himself, but what wasn't known was that he had internal bleeding. He was flown along with Robin and Francesco to the hospital. He was airlifted there, and he spent a number of weeks in the ICU. And very unfortunately, he succumbed to his injuries and passed away due to his injuries that he suffered in the car accident.
Damn.
When Jerry Colombo passed away, Uncle Jerry could have stopped and he still would have made a ton of money, but he would be basically getting away with it if he would have stopped. Because even if 10 years down the road someone had told the FBI, or even just people had talked and something had come out, they wouldn't have been able to really prove anything because it just would have been based on people's word of mouth. If it wasn't happening anymore, they wouldn't be able to listen to phone calls and, you know, speak to winners and find money that's being moved around. And a lot of the recruiters have also spoken about the fact that every time basically the competition ran, Uncle Jerry would say, this is the last time, this is the last one. I really think that if the tipster hadn't come forward, they would have been able to go on and on with this for who knows how long. Again, a lot of the people associated with this think that this in some form would have been going on today still if the tipster hadn't turned them in.
Maybe if certain things never happened, this would not would still be going on today. It's true.
So Uncle Jerry knew that he needed to get more recruiters to be able to distribute all the tickets that he was still acquiring. He went to a man who had sold him a number of lots in South Carolina, and this man's name was Dwight Baker. He was a very well-known developer and devout Mormon, and he unfortunately got in an accident whenever he was working on some properties. Basically, the piece of machinery that he was driving stalled out and he fell back into this big kind of quarry thing, and he ended up injuring his back very badly. So he didn't even know if he'd be able to go back to work again. And there were some other things happening where Jerry saw an opportunity. He saw that Dwight was injured, that he had a lot of medical bills, and that he didn't know whether he'd be able to go back to work to provide for his family because he had 5 kids. Jerry approached him and basically said that he was in charge of distributing these game pieces, and that if he wanted $1 million ticket, it was going to cost $100,000. Dwight said he couldn't do $100,000 at that time based on his injury and hospital bills, but he knew someone who probably could.
The final recruiter was AJ Glum, who I talked about a tiny bit in the earlier chapters. And AJ Glum actually, I think, was probably the most successful recruiter because when he would pick his winners or ask his friends who he was going to give the tickets to, he would fly all around the US. So it wasn't as obvious as to what was going on with his winners of the tickets, because when it came to Dwight and Jerry Colombo, they were picking people in the same area. And when it came to Dwight, the FBI actually dubbed an area in South Carolina the Golden Triangle, because this small area of a few miles was where a huge amount of winners were coming from. AJ Glum also didn't charge any money up front. He charged Uncle Jerry's fee, obviously, and then he himself charged anywhere between 10 to 60,000 based on what denomination the ticket was. AJ was brought in by one of his friends, Don Hart, who knew Uncle Jerry, and Don Hart said, if you want to cash in this ticket, we can split it between the two of us and this other entity, which was Uncle Jerry. And AJ said, oh, I don't want to do it myself. So he brought in a friend, Stanley, and then they ended up splitting the ticket 4 ways. AJ then decided, hey, this is pretty easy. So he began distributing the tickets for Uncle Jerry and was working with Don as well. After a couple of tickets, Don then said, I'm out, I want to leave, I don't want anything. And then AJ and Uncle Jerry just worked together themselves. So to go back to speaking about Dwight, Dwight actually brought in his foster son, George Chandler, and they were actually covered in the show McMillions, which went over this whole scheme as well. And one thing about that show is that the way they told the stories, it was each of the winners telling their story. So obviously people are going to want to paint themselves in the best light possible, especially when it's something like this where it technically is a crime and they're going to want to get people's understanding and sympathy. But Dwight actually did tell George Chandler that not to go screaming and shouting about this, not to do any of the interviews with McDonald's, and he ended up doing, of course, all of the interviews, which I'm sure I'm sharing on the screen with you. But whenever Dwight brought George Chandler in, he ended up telling him a bit of a different story. He told him that one of his friends had won this ticket, but he was going through a divorce and he didn't want the ticket to be shared out with him and his wife. And George basically said, oh, I understand that, because he had gone through a bad divorce himself, and then he ended up buying the ticket. Even though they report a lot of places that it was 100,000, that's what he was asked for initially, but he ended up paying 50,000 to Uncle Jerry because he couldn't come up with the entire 100K. Dwight asked George for a navigator and a laptop for orchestrating the ticket deal, and Baker then saw, hey, this is pretty easy. So he himself got involved with recruiting others for Uncle Jerry. First, he went to one of his friends who basically was like, I'll take 2 or 3 of those tickets, and he got some money off the back of that. Then Uncle Jerry approached Dwight with a bit of a different ticket. As I said, this happened for all of the McDonald's games. It wasn't just the Monopoly one. And this year that they were doing this, in 2000 and 2001, as that was when Dwight was recruiting for Uncle Jerry, one of the tickets was for $500,000. And the thing that was different about this one was that it was just going to pay out the entire $500,000. It wasn't going to be paid out over a number of years. So Dwight wanted this ticket, and he approached his sister-in-law about turning in the ticket, and them splitting the money. So while Dwight and his sister-in-law were working on cashing out this ticket, this was actually going on while the FBI was investigating. So the FBI spoke to McDonald's and told them to hold back the check because the FBI wanted to create a bit of panic and for them to think, oh, maybe there's some betrayal going on here, because that would tickle the wire. And tickling the wire means basically an action that they perform in hopes of getting people to go and make a phone call because they're obviously listening in on the wiretap. So say the FBI goes and visits someone, then when the FBI leave, maybe someone calls and says, oh my God, the FBI was here. Do you think they know about the McDonald's fraud? So they hoped that by holding this check back that this would create some doubt with Dwight, and then he would maybe think his sister-in-law is cashing out the ticket or hiding stuff from him. So after it seemed like enough time had passed, the check was actually sent, and Dwight realized she must have the check by now. So he went to where she was staying because they basically had set up like a fake address for her, and he went to the Indianapolis airport to confront the sister as she was trying to run with the money. And Dwight ended up getting in the car with his wife, who she was obviously involved and knew the whole situation. And she was trying to call her sister on her cell phone. And whenever she went to end the call, because back then, you know, a lot of the phones were like the flip phones, so when you would end the call, you would just snap it shut. She didn't snap it completely shut, and she just put the phone down. So the FBI had a wiretap, so they were basically listening to everything that was going on in the car. It was like they were sitting in the car listening, and they were talking about how they were going to confront her, but some of the language was a bit ambiguous. So the FBI thought that they were going to hurt the sister. So the FBI like raced to the airport, and they obviously didn't want to intervene if it wasn't going to be a bad situation, because that would blow the whole investigation. So they cautiously kind of made sure nothing was going to happen. Dwight confronted her, and then the two sisters, Dwight's wife and the sister-in-law, went to the bank, cashed the check, and split the money with them. After the airport situation, the FBI began looking even more at Dwight Baker, and they basically were really actively monitoring everything he was doing. Then very shortly afterwards, another ticket was being exchanged by Uncle Jerry and Dwight, and because Uncle Jerry lives in Atlanta and Dwight lives in South Carolina, they would usually just drive and meet. And the FBI one day got like half an hour warning that they were going to meet, and they then followed them to this location to basically film everything about them meeting. And they even had like a helicopter in the air that was filming them exchanging the tickets for money. And Dwight said that Uncle Jerry used to even sometimes bring like a McDonald's Coke and cheeseburger or fries or whatever item that the tickets were supposed to be on, because that was one of the things that McDonald's did expect was, okay, this year we're putting the ticket on a soda cup. So the winner had to say, I pulled this off my soda. And Uncle Jerry would, stick the stickers on, and Dwight said he would just put cash in a brown McDonald's bag and like give it to him that way. So the FBI, when they have pretty, for the 90s and early 2000s, it's pretty crystal clear footage of them meeting up and exchanging tickets. So since we've talked about wiretaps, I wanted to tell you about one really wild coincidental story that happened with this whole investigation. And I didn't want to put it in the earlier chapters because it wouldn't really make sense if I put it in this way. So it's just inserted here randomly because it's too good to not tell you. So this goes all the way back to the beginning of the investigation. Whenever the FBI or, whomever law enforcement is putting in a wiretap, basically what they have to do is speak to your phone company. So imagine, I'm being wiretapped, I have Verizon, then they will put in the warrant to Verizon and let them know, we're tapping Ash's phone lines, etc. And they actually faxed Uncle Jerry, again, early 2000s, they faxed the Warren and all the information to Jerry Jacobson's phone company, Uncle Jerry's phone company, to say, hey, we're tapping his phones, and they call it a Title III investigation. And the phone company, one of the people who worked at the phone company was Uncle Jerry's wife. But not only did she work there, her explicit job was to go and take all of the faxes off the fax machine and input all that information that was in the faxes into, you know, the computers or to the relevant person. So when the FBI realized this, because again, back then you couldn't just look up someone on social media and be like, oh, they work here. They then panicked and they looked into, you know, oh, has she seen it yet or what's happening? And fortunately for the FBI, that day she wasn't at work. But can you imagine, like, before this thing has even happened, you know, they're blowing their cover basically. If you'll believe it, there's an even crazier story about faxes and almost blowing the entire operation. So now we're going to go on to the next chapter, and to begin that chapter, I'll tell you that crazy story before we get too into it. So it's getting to the end of summer 2001. The FBI has pretty much all its ducks in a row. The only thing they cannot figure out is how is he stealing the game pieces. So the FBI and the Attorney General John Ashcroft decided, let's just go ahead with everything, and hopefully Jacobson himself will tell us how he was doing this when we arrest him. So they decided on August 21st, 2001, they were just going to arrest everyone at once, because then they wouldn't be able to tell each other, warn each other, or come up with any stories. Or one of the worst things would be if they arrest person one and these other people that are way down, you know, other winners or other people involved, and they hear about person one being arrested, they could make a run for it, or, you know, come up with stories, do anything. So it was best just to arrest everyone at once. So in order to arrest everyone at once, because they were spread all over the US, they basically had to get the help of like a lot of the other FBI departments. So the first thing that they were going to do before the arrest day on August 21st was that they would get everybody else up to speed. So they sent out this massive document that had everything about this investigation, like all the surveillance, all the people involved, everything that you could possibly know about what was going on with this entire Operation Final Answer. So one of the agents goes to fax this massive document, again, fax 2001, and of course there's some speed dials like most fax machines, and they hit like a lot of the offices, and there's one that just says Greenville, as in Greenville, North Carolina, but it didn't mean Greenville FBI office. It meant the Greenville News. So the FBI faxed a newspaper the entire document and outline of this entire investigation before they'd arrested anyone. And the paper has no obligation whatsoever not to report on this, because obviously they can go and report on something that they've been informed about. So a number of FBI agents and the prosecutor, Mark Devereaux, go to Greenville, and they go to the newspaper and basically, you know, beg them not to release the information. They came up with a little barter of, okay, they won't publish the story until after the arrests, but they wanted the exclusive on the story, and they also wanted a picture to go with the story. So that is why the random newspaper of the Greenville News got the exclusive on the entire McDonald's monopoly Operation Final Answer fraud. So now to the actual arrests. The first thing on August 21st, everyone is indicted. They indicted 8 people first, which were mainly the people who they knew for sure were involved. They indicted all of the middlemen, Dwight and Linda Baker, Linda's sister Brenda Phoenix, AJ Glum, Robin Colombo, who was already incarcerated, and then the people named by the tipster, Buddy Fisher, Gloria Brown, and of course they arrested Uncle Jerry, Jerome Jacobson. The middlemen were arrested and brought in, and for other people like Gloria Brown, people that basically turned in the tickets, if they cooperated and basically admitted that yes, this is something I did, the FBI just took their statement. But if they didn't, or they denied it, or they didn't cooperate, that's when they arrested them. They then went to the second layer of people, which was people like Jerome Jacobson's stepbrother Marvin, who was actually the first person to cash a ticket in 1988, and he and Jerry split it. The ticket was for $25,000. In total, they indicted 53 people with this scheme, and Jerry Jacobson immediately didn't speak. He is actually former law enforcement, so you pretty much expect that. He just didn't cooperate, didn't speak, and because he had never told anyone how he was stealing the tickets, nobody could basically tell the FBI how it was happening. Jerry then immediately hired a very fancy criminal defense lawyer, and they said, do not speak, will speak. In McMillions, one of the defense lawyers basically says his motto is, a fish wouldn't get caught if he kept his mouth shut. So that's their motto. So they didn't really have much of a defense, of course, because it's so obvious, and they'd followed it, like they'd done all the investigation while the scheme was happening, so they had pretty much everything, and they couldn't really have much of a defense, but it was just about making kind of a bit of a deal. So in hopes of getting a lesser sentence, Jerry basically completely cooperated with the government, and then he also told them how he did it. So how did he do it? You're going to be surprised and not surprised. So as I talked about in the very beginning, in order to bring these tickets to the factories and insert them into the production lines, Jerry had to take them from the printing facility, Dittler Brothers, and bring them to McDonald's packaging factories. So he was flown all around the US in first class, and when you're going in first class, you can go into the airport lounges. So that's what he would do. He would go into the airport lounges, and he would then excuse himself from the auditor, because he always had to travel with the auditor. Neither of them was supposed to ever have the briefcase alone at any time. And he obviously had the briefcase handcuffed to him, so the briefcase went with him to the bathroom. And when he went to the bathroom, he opened the briefcase, and he had one of the locks on the side, but the other lock, the auditor was only supposed to have the combination. If you remember, all the way back in the beginning chapter, I talked about how Jerry used to look over the shoulder of the people with the codes in order to open the vault, and this is obviously what he did with the auditor. He just looked over her shoulder and got her code. So after opening the briefcase, inside would be the envelope with all of the tickets inside. On the front, as I said earlier, there was a number denoting how many tickets were inside. So on the back, where the seal was of course the sticker with the holograms that, if taken off or tampered with, would leave the void sign, and then there was the signatures along the seal as well. Jerry would then take a little penknife, because as I've said a lot throughout this video, it was the summer of 2001 and before, so it was before September 11th. And if you've never traveled before 9/11, or you're too young to have traveled before 9/11 or remember it, it was a completely different experience. You could show up very close to your flight time and just sail on through. You could actually meet people at their gate when they would come off the plane, because you just didn't have to go through security. You didn't have a ticket to go through security, and security wasn't what it is today. You could still wear your shoes, you could still have liquids, and it was very different then. It just didn't have the same sort of presence that it does now. So bringing a little penknife through, no one would have thought thought twice about it. So he would take the penknife and just underneath the sticker, just cut it open, and of course, they're still going to leave the void sign, but we'll talk about that in a second. So he would open up the envelope, dump out the tickets, and he would basically just take all of them because he knew there was at least $2 million ones in there, and there was all the other denominations as well. So he would put them in this little vest that he'd made specifically for stealing these tickets, and then he would take out a bunch of common ones that he'd brought with him and count out the amount that needed to replace whatever number was on the front of the envelope. He'd then put the commons back in the envelope and he would seal it with a little bit of glue. And then here's the key thing. The only reason he was able to do all of this, he would take out one of the metallic void stickers and just stick a new one over the top of the void sign so it looks as though no one has removed a sticker and it's just the original one on there. He actually was sent a whole sheet of these stickers by mistake. Instead of the company who was manufacturing these stickers sending them to one of the executives, they accidentally sent them to Jerome Jacobson, the head of security. So he never, ever would have been able to do any of this without those metallic stickers. And that's how he did it. A stupid shipping error that someone sent them to him. I mean, nowadays you could probably do this as well because you could just go buy them somewhere. I'm sure you could figure out where the stickers were coming from and just buy a sheet. But it's absolutely wild that some silly little error of sending the stickers to the wrong person in their address book has caused all of this, caused almost $30 million of fraud. And it's actually a lot more than that if we're being real here, because they couldn't actually prove a lot of the fraud for the early day winners because Jerry Colombo passed away, and they couldn't really, like in a court of law, prove with evidence that these people won because they bought their ticket or were given a ticket by Jerry Colombo. Because he'd passed away, and a lot of the evidence for this case and the 7 people that didn't take deals with the government, those people that went to trial, a lot of the evidence against them was everything that the FBI was able to get through the investigation that was done by following the last game. If they had just stopped the year before, nobody really would have been prosecuted because they wouldn't be able to prove it in a court of law. And realistically, the number is much closer, probably way higher than 50 million, because there are still people that they have no way of even knowing if their ticket was got through legitimate ways or through fraud. And there is so many other things. Down the road, I'd love to do a video about the M&M's thing, or maybe some of the other fraud that was going on with Jerome Jacobson and some of the Colombos, because it's not really even known, because again, if they don't know, they can't investigate it. And there's a lot of stuff that I've heard about or been told about that still to this day it is unknown. But of course, a lot of it is hearsay and things like that because it hasn't been found out. So there's no actual evidence that you can really point to and be like, this is exactly how this happened, and so on and so forth. So it'd be a much looser video, but it's pretty interesting to think about. So due to the fact that Jerry cooperated with them, he was only sentenced to 37 months in prison, just over 3 years. And the way that they got a lot of these people was mail fraud, because that's pretty much how they will get you and things like that, where, you know, there's not a law in the book that says it's fraud to trade game pieces. Yes, it's deceptive and all these things, but they basically, because they've used the mail service, that was what they were doing when it came to breaking the law. And also, when it comes to things like this, where the mail fraud is involved, it's not that they're going to be prosecuted on what they have in their bank or what denomination of money they actually benefited from the scheme. It's how much they stole. So someone like AJ Glum, who ended up giving out tickets that were worth, 10, 12, 13 million, he may have ended up with 600,000, but he was actually prosecuted for taking the 12, 13 million. So that's what his restitution is going to be. And Jerome Jacobson, his restitution is in the tens of millions. And you're never, ever, ever gonna pay.
I'm bougie. I'm like $7 bougie.
The all-new $7 deal lovers menu at Pizza Hut. Choose your $7 faves 7 days a week.
Because it's only a deal if you love it.
No one outbeats the Hut.
That bag. So a lot of these people are still paying restitution, but they pay something like $140 a month. Like, it's really not anything.
To this day, I pay $160 a month.
And quite honestly, it's really not a lot of consequences for 10 plus years of stealing millions of dollars, of living this amazing high life. And I would be shocked if there wasn't some sort of contingency plan with money squirreled away for a rainy day or for the inevitable day that everything came crashing down.
If you had to do it again, would you do it again? Tomorrow. Tomorrow.
We're not finished yet because we've got to find out who the informant was, and I'm going to speak to someone who was the reason that all this came crashing down. But I would really, really love to know, what would you do? What would you do if somebody came to you and said, this ticket is for $1 million, you can cash it in and have $50K for the next 20 years, or, one of the $100K tickets, you get $100K, like that, okay, taxes and everything. What would you do? I mean, really, honestly, what would you do? Before we go on to our last chapter about the informant, there was one other weird thing that stood out, and it's quite interesting. When going through the list of winners, there is one winner that really stands out from all the rest from 1989 to 2001, and that was in 1995. The winner was St. Jude's Children's Hospital, and what happened was, around Christmas 1995, St. Jude's opened an envelope, and inside was anonymously $1 million game piece. Now, there was a lot of news publicity around this, of course, St. Jude's and McDonald's, and they ended up not transferring the ticket because McDonald's, even in some of the news reports, says tickets aren't transferable, but they ended up giving St. Jude's $1 million donation. So this ticket was actually sent in by Uncle Jerry, and it's really interesting looking at things like this because obviously I talk about fraud a lot on this channel, and there's a lot of people, like even look at Sam Bankman-Fried recently, that they do all these terrible things, but they will try and either justify it to themselves or try and do things to put a lot of things in the positive column when they're doing all these negative things. And with Uncle Jerry, he thought that this would actually look favorably on him if he was ever caught. But there was one other thing that he was trying to use as a get out of jail free card, to use a Monopoly reference, and that was that unbeknownst to McDonald's, Simon and Dittler, when they were running this program that would determine which state or area the winning game pieces would go into at the McDonald's packaging factory, they were actually excluding Canada when they should have been using, all 50 states and Canada. But really, Simon and Dittler, if ever Canada or a region of Canada was chosen, they would just run the program again. So Uncle Jerry thought that this would be like a good bargaining chip if he ever got caught. although when Uncle Jerry was caught, it wasn't Simon or Dittler who caught him, it was the FBI. And if Canada wasn't being included was the last thing on Simon and Dittler's mind, because a few days after Jerry was arrested, the FBI went in and closed Simon Marketing and Dittler Brothers down and, you know, got a lot of the documentation out of there because they were unsure if there was anyone else involved with this, with Jerry Jacobson. And what ended up happening is this entire thing with Jerry Jacobson caused Simon Marketing and Dittler Brothers to be no more. Simon Marketing had offices all around the world, and they actually, at the time when all of this came out, Simon Marketing had the single largest drop on the stock exchange. They went from shares at about $100 down to 50 cents in one day. All of the offices were closed, and everyone at Simon Marketing and Dittler Brothers lost their jobs. And that's why, after two really heavy stories of Danny Masterson and the Murdaugh murders, I wanted to do a bit of a lighter thing. But it's still important to know that there was real consequences here, like real people, this affected them, and they lost their jobs, all over Jerome Jacobson being greedy. But the last thing to talk about is, of course, one of the best things. Who was the informant? Who?
When picking a commerce platform, you have two choices.
Oh, you piece of...
Or, that's the sound of selling on Shopify, online, in person, and beyond. Join the millions of businesses growing on Shopify. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/YouTube audio.
Who brought this whole thing down? And that's what we're going to talk about in the next chapter. I literally ordered this like 6 weeks ago, and of course it doesn't come till today, Saturday, November 25th, when I'm about to upload this tomorrow, but at least it came for the conclusion. So, the informant. Who is the informant? Something that is really interesting about this case, but it's really interesting when you look into why they called the FBI. So, if you go back and watch this video again, you'll see you did get a little glance at who the informant was, and the informant was actually Mrs. Colombo, Jerry Colombo's mother. And the reason that she called the FBI, because of course, remember, the names that the FBI were given were Uncle Jerry, Robin Colombo, her father, Buddy Fisher, and Robin's friend, Gloria Brown. So the reason that those names were chosen specifically too were all tied in to Jerry and Robin's son, Francesco Colombo. So when all this was happening, Francesco was a little boy, and when Jerry passed away, Robin got into some situations with Grand Theft Auto and check hiding, and she actually was incarcerated already when everything came out about the McDonald's thing and all of the arrests were happening in August 2001. So because she'd been incarcerated for a while, so while she was in prison, Mrs. Colombo had custody of Francesco. And when it was coming up to the time that Robin was going to be released, Mrs. Colombo, whose son had passed away, obviously, she wanted to have Francesco and wanted custody of him and wanted to raise him. So this was her way of not only getting rid of Robin, who would obviously get out of prison and get custody of her son, it also got rid of the only other people who could raise Francesco, which was his other set of grandparents. So when Mrs. Colombo called the FBI, she knew, my son's passed away, he's not going to get in trouble, and this is how I keep my grandson. So that's why Mrs. Colombo was the informant. And over the past few years, I've had a friendship with Francesco Colombo, and we're going to be talking to him in just a second. But also, interestingly, he has told me that his grandmother had no idea this was still going on, because obviously the I literally ordered this like 6 weeks ago,
And of course, it doesn't come till today, Saturday, November 25th, when I'm about to upload this tomorrow, but at least it came for the conclusion. So, the informant. Who is the informant? Something that is really interesting about this case, but it's really interesting when you look into why they called the FBI. So, if you go back and watch this video again, you'll see you did get a little glance at who the informant was, and the informant was actually Mrs. Colombo, Jerry Colombo's mother. And the reason that she called the FBI, because of course, remember, the names that the FBI were given were Uncle Jerry, Robin Colombo, her father, Buddy Fisher, and Robin's friend, Gloria Brown. So the reason that those names were chosen specifically too were all tied in to Jerry and Robin's son, Francesco Colombo. So when all this was happening, Francesco was a little boy, and when Jerry passed away, Robin got into some situations with Grand Theft Auto and check kiting, and she actually was incarcerated already when everything came out about the McDonald's thing, and all of the arrests were happening in August 2001. So because she'd been incarcerated for a while, so while she was in prison, Mrs. Colombo had custody of Francesco. And when it was coming up to the time that Robin was going to be released, Mrs. Colombo, whose son had passed away, obviously, she wanted to have Francesco and wanted custody of him and wanted to raise him. So this was her way of not only getting rid of Robin, who would obviously get out of prison and get custody of her son, it also got rid of the only other people who could raise Francesco, which was his other set of grandparents. So when Mrs. Colombo called the FBI, she knew, my son's passed away, he's not going to get in trouble, and this is how I keep my grandson. So that's why Mrs. Colombo was the informant. And over the past few years, I've had a friendship with Francesco Colombo, and we're going to be talking to him in just a second. But also, interestingly, he has told me that his grandmother had no idea this was still going on, because obviously when Jerry passed away, she wasn't getting any more information. And she actually thought when Jerry Colombo passed away that Uncle Jerry had stopped, because he had only started after the chance meeting of the two Jerrys, which is actually what Francesco will explain in a minute when I show our little interview. So Mrs. Colombo didn't have any clue that all these other people were involved, and that when Jerry Colombo passed away, that, you know, there was new middlemen of Dwight Baker and AJ Glum and all these other ones, and there was more winners, and that there was going to be another Monopoly game, and the FBI was going to investigate it and, you know, set up all these undercover operations, and it was going to be this whole thing. She had no idea. She just thought, oh, it's this little operation with the two Jerrys and, you know, a few family members and friends. So it's absolutely fascinating why the whole thing happened. And really, it all happened because of Francesco. She never would have turned Robin and everybody else in if it wasn't for Francesco. So now we're going to go back in time to Florida when I went home to Tampa, and Francesco and his fiancée Maddie came down and met me. We, you know, hung out for a whole day and night and had dinner and everything. So the interview, I've only put a little bit in here because, as you guys know, I'm not short on words, so I don't want to show you, you know, that's a multi-hour long interview. So I will probably put the rest of it up on my Instagram, or maybe as an unlisted video here. But just if it jumps around a bit, no, that's the reason. I've like cut a lot of stuff out of us going off on tangents. So I hope that you enjoy this little bit of, you know, on the scene reporting. Well, I'm joking, obviously. And yes, I am not any sort of expert interviewer, so just know that also going into it. Do you have like any idea how many people, like how many winners were involved with like your dad, or?
I think there was definitely more than there was on the show.
Yeah. Some secret ones out there though.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure they're out there. I'm sure they're watching now, like, shh.
Yeah. I hope he doesn't
Because
say
the
my
grandmother
name.
wanted to keep
Yeah, I
him.
remember
your mom saying in McMillions about the gray M&M.
Oh yes! Oh my goodness, that's so funny. Because she was saying how she ate it, and my dad was like, oh, "No, that's another prize."
So you must have had another little couple of.
I have no idea how this man did it, but he had something going on all the time with different operations. You know, like he had the McMillions thing going on, and then he had this M&M. But it's so cool to think about too. Like, my dad sat on a plane with this man that was the head of security for McDonald's, who was hired to keep these pieces safe. And my dad was like, "Hey, you should give those to me, and let's distribute them and make some money." And the guy was like, "Okay." It was literally just a freak coincidence that they were on this plane, and my dad was going somewhere, to some casino, I think, or something, and this guy was just like, "Oh yeah, I have this briefcase with these winning tickets." And somehow my dad convinced him to give him the pieces. They just, on this plane ride, created this whole thing. And it was like, literally, that's how I believe it happened. I don't think they knew each other at all. Both named Jerry, both on a plane, and then it just creates this whole thing. It's crazy. I know at the end they got my grandma on there because she didn't want to be on the show the whole time. And then they were like, "Hey, why don't we film your daughter's first birthday party?" Of course grandma's going to be at that. So she came in with her big sunglasses and her hat and just stayed off to the side. But they got her on there.
Yeah, I guess they really wanted to get her on camera since she was the informant.
Right. They wanted to interview her really bad. And I know she just wasn't happy. She was like, "Nope, not going to happen." She was like, "There's no chance."
Just want to say thank you so much for coming to Tampa so that we could meet up, since we've been little internet friends.
I know, it's been a couple years, but it's been so cool. And it's like, now we're here. It's really cool, and it's cool to build these relationships with people, and then you never know where they're going to lead.
So I hope you enjoyed that little insight. I thought it would just be cool to get one of the people involved on camera. And as you've heard, Francesco's grandmother wanted nothing to do with any interviews. And that's actually why in the show McMillions, you only ever see her kind of in the background, because Francesco actually told me at dinner that the HBO people involved with McMillions, they were really trying to get his grandmother and to have an interview with her, but she was like no, and that's why they had his daughter's birthday, because they knew, oh, she's gonna come to that. And I swear there's a few minutes in McMillions where you see her kind of looking over at them.
Bullshit,
but
dog. It ain't never took
very,
that long to
very
kill
interesting
myself.
case, and I hope that you guys enjoyed hearing about it. It was one of those stories that didn't really get a lot of publicity because they actually went to trial on the 12th of September 2001, so there was never any real media about it after 9/11, so I think that that's why a lot of people still don't even know about it. And if you made it to the end of this video, just thank you so much for watching. I know it's so cliche to say, but I really do appreciate it. And I really hope that next month, December, I'm gonna start uploading every 2.5 to 3 weeks, because I really love doing this and people have been so kind lately. So just thank you if you've watched this. Happy Thanksgiving if you're in the US, and as always, make sure to stay safe, take care of yourselves, and I hope I get to see you in the next one. Bye guys.
Yeah, just what y'all think? Y'all knew about the scam? If y'all ain't know about it, let me know. Let me know in the comments. I didn't know. What y'all think? Let me know.